fastest show in sports.
Everything we've talked about now seems to then point to what's happening in other sports, because there is a rise in the physical nature and the demand by the fan, and also the demand of the player, the coaches, everybody involved, to be more physical. The WNBA is a prime example. There is much more physicality in this brand of the WNBA than there ever was before, and people are saying it's necessary. But some are going back and saying, wait a minute, why does it need to be this way? Why does this physicality need to be there to the point of almost wanting to hurt someone? That's the idea that they're getting here. Are we becoming a little too physical even in sports?
I'm going to defer to you on that because I don't watch a lot of basketball. I know that, I watched some of the NBA playoffs, and the men's game is more physical now, too.
Yes.
I think that the object is not. I mean, look, the object in boxing is to hurt. That's it. You're not trying to score points. It's not fencing. It's not. We're not debating here. We are trying to hurt one another. The argument in favor of the NFL, which has probably as much brain injury as boxing, is that that's not the object. Is to move the ball. It's not to hurt each other. The object in basketball is not to hurt one another. It's to get to the basket any way you can. And I watched some of the Knicks Pacers, and I was like, God, I would never go down the lane the way these guys are because it's dangerous. It's like you're running a gauntlet. I don't know why it's encouraged. I don't think it's for the fans. I mean, maybe, and I'm guessing here because I don't watch the WNBA, but I'm assuming that the powers that be there want it to be more like the men's game to make it more popular.
Yes.
Is that possible?
Yes. They want it to be more like the men's game, but they want it to be that physical brand of basketball. And the women want to go out in many cases, and they want to prove that they can be just as physical and sometimes just as dirty as the male player. And quite frankly, there's an awful lot of officiating that lets it go.
You're old enough to remember, when there was a big divide between men and women's tennis. And there still is in terms of money. But I mean, the women's game was slower. It was a lot of volleying, and it would go on forever. And the men were crushing the ball. And then along came the Williams sisters, and suddenly everybody, women were now serving at 130 miles an hour. And I think part of the reason is, in order to make money in anything, you do have to appeal to men. I mean, you can't cut out half the population, and if men are bored by women's tennis for whatever reason or bored by the WNBA, well, let's give them what they want to make them watch us.
Well, but the National Football League is the first one to stand up and say that we now get more women than we ever got before because women are getting into what is the play in the National Football League.
Because of the tight pants? I don't know.
Could be. I mean, hey, look, whatever sells, it's all marketing, baby. It's all Madison Avenue and sales.
Well, the NFL's always been sex and violence, right? Cheerleaders and guys beating the crap out of each other. But I mean, the other thing is the NFL makes a public stand of like trying to downplay its violence, right? I mean, you can't really hit the quarterback anymore. You can't come near the punter. We're really worried about CTE. Of course, they're really not worried about any of these things, but cosmetically, they want you to think that, we're toning it down a little bit. And believe me, people don't want that. Even ex-players will tell you, the game's not the way it was when I was there, and you're old enough maybe to remember, I saw Ben Davidson break Joe Namath's jaw. I don't even think he got a penalty for it.
I was just a wee child at that point.
It was the game was different back then. The guys wore a single bar and, just punching each other in the face. And, and I know the guys are bigger and stronger and faster now, but they are kind of handcuffed by the rules. And the older players think today's players are a bunch of pussies, believe it or not.
Well, but are we reaching a point where if you look at the physicality in the game, and you mentioned the words brain injury, which is certainly out there in the National Football League, in the National Hockey League, in professional soccer where there's no headgear whatsoever, and they're talking about various CTE cases and concussions in soccer. But are we looking at a point where simply because the human body can only take so much, Wally, that we're going to have to legislate this? Games are going to become a little less physical, and there's going to have to be, as we start to see more players from the National Football League come out in their later years and die from conditions based close to CTE, that we're going to have to start legislating this. And the games might become a little bit softer.
Well, when you say legislating, what do you mean? Do you mean that you could actually arrest somebody on the football field for?
No, I'm talking about rules wise and hits and stopping.
Legislating by the league. I mean,
Correct.
them
Right. No,
legislating.
I'm not talking about outside legislation. I'm talking
Can you
about.
imagine like the cops like jumping on the field and dragging a guy off?
No, brother,
look,
I was not going there. Please, let's not start that. Somebody will accuse me of that. Watch.
No, but if that was the case, Mike Tyson should have been arrested and dragged out of the ring the night he bit Holyfield's ear off.
Sure.
Because that became a criminal assault. Boxing is classified as unarmed combat, and if you're fighting within the rules, it's legal. But if you do something like that, you've committed a crime. It's no longer a fight; it's now a crime scene.
It's an interesting dichotomy to look at. What's the difference between a boxing event and a crime?
Well, I mean, boxing was illegal for many years. In the 1920s, it was legalized again, and under certain rules, you are allowed to conduct yourself in a certain manner. You're allowed to beat your opponent senseless with your fists. But, if he was on the ground and you started stomping him, I would assume you've now committed a crime. If you bite a guy's ear off, you have committed a crime. But, in Las Vegas, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, I guess. But, yeah, you could make the case of that. I mean, I'm old enough, and I know I'm a little bit older than you, but I remember when Juan Rarichel hit John Roseborough over the head with a bat in a baseball game.
Right.
That's a crime.
Yeah.
You would think that's a crime. That's an assault. Of course, he was disciplined by the league, but police.
But he went after another human being with a baseball bat. I mean,
try that in the street and see what happens to you. All right.
I watched some kind of a Dateline special last night, and it talked about how a grandfather and a wife went after their husband, and they beat him with a baseball bat, and they killed him.
That I believe is a crime.
It is.
I think you go to jail for that. Well, apparently things that happen in a sporting event are not, I guess, prosecutable.
Although I guess you would say at that point, well, the two of them got into the ring and they both know that they had the opportunity to beat each other up, so it's okay at that point. It's not illegal.
Well, they're allowed to do that. That's legal. That's legal.
Right.
But nowhere in the rules does it say you could step on the guy's face, right? Or bite a part of his body off, or take his arm behind his back and break it. You can't. No, those would be criminal assaults, I would think, if the law was actually enforced
right
to the letter. If they were actually subject to the same laws that you or I would be. If you bit somebody, if you were sitting in the crowd at the Tyson Holyfield fight and bit the guy's ear off next to you, I don't know why you would, but I guarantee you would have been arrested.
Have you seen the prices of concession food these days? I mean,
you're right. Put a little
come on, brother. It's easy and it's right there. It doesn't cost anything. It's not a $52 bucket of popcorn. But are we looking, because you've covered so many sports? I mean, I have as well, but certainly not as in depth as you have. But are we reaching that point where eventually every sport is going to have to be pulled back on the physical nature of it because you will have more people dying?
I don't know. I mean, it's tough to put the toothpaste back in the tube, and as we know, what wags the tail of the dog? Money. And if a more violent NFL or more violent WNBA, if a more violent NHL, I don't know how baseball could be more violent once they're allowed to start throwing the baseball at each other. But I mean, if that generated more money and brought more eyeballs, I don't think, the leagues would certainly fight any attempt to pull back on it. The networks would fight any attempt to pull back on it. I mean, we saw what happened. I mean, Congress got involved in the steroid thing with baseball about 20 years ago. And they did make some headway. I mean, baseball was embarrassed into doing something about it. Otherwise, they would have, Bud Selig would have still said, "I don't know anything about this." Just big bullshit. Until
they're using steroids on the field. Oh my God, they're hitting home runs because of steroids. Shock.
So anyway, I think as long as everybody's lining their pockets as a result of this, nothing's going to be done about it. And, why Congress did something about it, I have did something about steroids. I have no idea what.
They got nothing else to take care of. Everything else in the country and every other item has been solved.
Smoothly.
We're real good now. Now we can go after steroids in baseball because that's what we need to do. Wally, I'm still stunned to this day that no one has ever tried to make rollerball a real sport. Think about it.
That MMA? Wait a minute.
Think about it for just a minute here. If you go back to the original, not that extra one that was made years later that was absolutely terrible. If you go back to the original with James Caan, and you've
Oh,
got
that was-
you've got motorcycles, you've got people beating each other up, you've got serious injuries, you've got comas, you've got blood
sounds
on.
like a winner.
It's a winner. I mean, and
Can't
not only
miss.
that, but let's face it, if you're going to have people beating each other up in the octagon or in a ring, and if you're going to have guys hitting each other in the face in fights that are legislated and allowed in hockey, and you're going to have all these, go for it.
Not only legislated and allowed, but encouraged. You know, when the NHL is marketing videotapes of the greatest fights, you know, what you putting me in the penalty box or something and you're selling on a videotape? Come on, man.
That's all, folks.